come back. That's what I'm excited for.
That ain't gonna happen. I wish I could do that though. Those days are long gone though.
All right, got our notes pulled up. All right, come on. There we go. Wait for everyone to get in here. We're good on timing.
And today I do have a little bit of background noise, so I'm going to be employing mute a lot on my end.
No worries. Hey, Adrian.
Good morning. Good morning.
I think we have everybody. Oh, we're waiting on Anthony?
Yeah, we're waiting on Anthony.
Let me reach out.
That's Mark.
Oh.
And I don't know if I'm not going to do a presentation. I was trying to do it. It was crashing Zoom when I was testing it. So I'm just there won't be a share screen from me today.
Okay, got it. Let me reach out to Anthony. If he's jumping on, we can just start getting him in here.
Can you guys send me the run of show again for Mary Jo?
Yeah, stand by.
Please.
Whoops.
Give it to about 1:05, and if I'm messaging Anthony right now, if not, then we'll kick off the webinar.
Thanks, Adrian.
All right, I try to text his way. Let me jump in the chat here.
What do you hear from Anthony, Mark?
I messaged him. His phone went straight to voicemail. So I shot him a text, asked him if he needed a link or anything, and I've yet to hear back. So let's just go ahead and we'll get things started. And then once Anthony joins us, we'll get him looped in on the conversation.
That's terrific.
Rolling. All right, cool. Let's see, we're on YouTube. Looks like we're all set up here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone for joining us for our 31st webinar. We are super excited to continue bringing you TM101. This is our first breakout session, which we're excited to continue the conversation on green touring. Jen Regan is giving us her wonderful presence to be with us again. We are forever thankful that you are here with us. You have given us so much knowledge on the green touring world, and we are so happy that you're here with us. Anthony will be with us shortly, and we will get him transitioned in once he joins us. Let me go ahead and kick things off. Jen, I'd like to start the conversation on climate. Like, what is climate? The patterns we observe in weather over time, things like that. We'd love to kind of bring our students up to speed on the climate topic as we kick things off.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, everyone. Thanks again for having me back. For any new faces that are joining us live, I just wanted to say we started this conversation on episode 24, was it? I think.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. And so if any of the things we're saying today sound like we're continuing our thoughts from a previous conversation, that's exactly what we're doing. So please join us in the conversation and go back to episode 24. Also, just a little bit of for anyone who doesn't know me, I cut my teeth in sustainability in the sports and live festival side. So with the fixed venue, I started with fixed venues and developed sustainability practices at AEG and their AEG One Earth program. And then I went out into the world and started doing more event-based work. And so I've been on tour with U2 and Mumford and Sons. So I've had a chance to tour with AEG, with Live Nation, and see, I have had mainly experience at the arena, club, and theater level, not as much on bus tours. So it's a little bit about me, and I'm here to learn just as much as you, but I have spent the last 15 years focused on understanding how to take sustainability practices from the industries that have perfected them and apply it to the Wild West of live entertainment. So that's a little bit about me and my approach. And if anyone's wondering why the heck they are thanking me for being here, it's because I put a lot of time into my sustainability knowledge, and I'm eager to share and empower others, especially because I think I wanted to say before I go into climate, all of this stuff can feel very overwhelming even to me. And so I like to try to think about the fact that each of us, the only thing we have to do is find a way of taking one step and one change in the power that we have, right? Where we have the most influence. So if I share this knowledge with you, you will think of ways to innovate and improve that I could never think of. So just want to make sure I identify as an expert, but I also identify as a learner. So
We all have a personal footprint.
Yeah.
Our little footprint. And sometimes our footprint is small, and sometimes depending on what we're doing, our footprint can be a little bit larger and have a little bit larger ripple effect.
Yeah. And we can all influence decision makers, either with our own decisions as a decision maker or the other decision makers we work alongside. So, and a big Tennessee howdy to everyone, which we just saw in the chat. Which
That's
I think is a great way
that's
to
our
start.
buddy. That's our friend John Aiken, who is the Lord of transportation. John is literally the bus man.
Fantastic, John. Okay, great.
Yeah,
so you're going to love
yeah.
this topic. I'm sure that
Nice
this
to
has come
see
up
you
on your
from
tours.
Tennessee. Yeah, he was part of our esteemed panel of transportation folks a while back. Whenever that was, back in the early stages of TM 101.
20-some episodes ago.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Nice to see you always, John. Thanks for stopping in.
And I think the reason we wanted to do at least another one webinar on this is because, I mean, if you watched our first one, we covered a lot of ground of what is an incredibly complex and ever evolving situation. And, you know, in the aim of not paying lip service to that and continuing the conversation, we really wanted to touch back on it, and we may do so again, because this is not as simple as us being able to lay out how we do something. This is an ever evolving process. And actually, from our preparatory call with Jen yesterday, it was more almost an ideas session. We were throwing around ideas between us, and being, you know, obviously Jen is the expert and Anthony are the experts in this field, but, you know, it requires input, like Jen said, from people like us, because we have a unique perspective on the touring world, and we can bring ideas to the table, and that needs to be a collaborative process. So that is the aim of us, of having another one of these green touring sessions. And if we do so again in the future, that will continue to be the aim, is to keep positing ideas and pushing this conversation forward. So, you know, rather than us saying
yeah.
this is how we do it. This is an evolved, it's a real living, breathing thing that we need to continue to build upon.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Doug. And then I think that's also why we want a lively chat, and we're already demonstrating we're going to be pulling the chat in because we want it to be an ongoing conversation. But I did ask permission, and everyone said it would be valuable to kind of give a primer, as Mark tried to tee up here, about climate change, because I feel like, and climate. And so I did want to jump into that before we start all sharing our experience. And, you know, there are different ways in which you can seek information about climate change. A lot of us are, I apologize, there's a lot of background noise where I am. So, but it's no accident that there's like an alarm going off when I'm talking about climate change, because we really do want to wake up to the facts of climate change. It's a very alarming topic, but it's also very simple. And so I wanted to just kind of give us a simple definition. I have gone through Al Gore's climate reality training, which is one of many different ways you can educate yourself and learn and have more climate literacy. The thing is, as any of us know, an inconvenient truth was rather doomsday. And we're finding that the goal right now is to empower and inspire people into positive action. So I tend to take what helps inspire and motivate. But what motivates me is actually how simple it is. And so climate change refers to the changes that, so climate change, I'm reading this from something and I can send it out later, refers to the changes scientists have observed in long-term temperature, precipitation, and wind patterns, thanks to higher levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So a lot of people confuse extreme weather as climate change. Extreme weather is a symptom or evidence of climate change, but climate change itself is the observation over the long term. And it's that long-term perspective that has allowed us to identify that although greenhouse gases have naturally occurred and raised and fluctuated throughout the history of recorded temperatures, which goes back really far because they've gone into ice cores or tree cores, and they have a lot of ways of looking at temperature over long periods of time. The one thing that is very clear is that there has been a decidedly marked increase of carbon levels and global temperatures since the Industrial Revolution. The key change in that was our human behavior. And the human behavior that we changed was the burning of fossil fuels. So what's the problem? The problem statement is simple. Carbon pollution from the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas, and maybe the burning of natural grass too, but is raising global temperatures and disrupting our natural systems. So burning coal, burning oil, burning natural gas. Also, agricultural farming of cows releasing methane, increase of landfills and landfills releasing other toxic gases. So there's a lot of human behavior that has increased the natural occurrence of greenhouse gas releasing. What has happened because of this is the temperature is shifting faster than geography and climate, than the geography can adjust. So what we're seeing is more extreme weather disasters, higher healthcare bills because there's more toxins in the air. They can link asthma and autism and several other human experienced illnesses with pollution and the increase of greenhouse gases in air quality. And then what happens when we have these extreme weather events like droughts or hurricanes is that we see infrastructure destruction and uncertainty in our urban planning and our thoughts of, you know, where people might have been able to live for 150, 200, 300 years, they might not be able to live there for the next 50 or even 25. And so this level of uncertainty and infrastructure destruction, we could just say the problem, the earth will actually survive carbon pollution. The earth will evolve. It's the humans that won't survive the results of the carbon pollution. And so it's really a human problem. It's not a natural problem. And I feel like that's important. So what that means, our global temperature is currently on pace to rise 4 degrees Celsius. Now, 4 degrees sounds like nothing for an individual day to day, but if you think of the resting temperature of certain locations and how that adjustment, if the resting temperature changes that much, how it pushes seasons back, how it changes farming cycles, how it rises sea levels, what happens is there will be impacts of climate change that will impact the human experience. So a lot of the science has said if we can keep that raising pace to 2 degrees versus 4, we could potentially still maintain a lot of the quality of life that we are comfortable with. So a lot of the nonprofits or groups that are trying to educate have these numbers. I don't know if you guys have heard of a group called 350.org. They're talking about 350 parts per million. There's a lot of math behind it, but at the end of the day, it's as simple as this. carbon pollution from burning of fossil fuels. It's increasing global temperatures and greenhouse gases, and that affects humans' way of life. So when you learn that and you start to understand the data, you're like, well, okay, great. So it affects us more than anybody else. Why don't we do something? What do we do? Super simple. The ultimate solution is to switch from fossil fuels to renewable. And what's really cool is because people have been tracking this issue for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, there's actually enough technology for us to do that. And there's some incredible models. The challenge is that we've got the inertia and the momentum of an economy that's pricing and everything is based on fossil fuels. And so what we're doing right now is, so far, especially in the US, all these changes to halt the use of fossil fuels have fallen into two categories. Either investing in new tech like renewable tech and making the transfer, or making choices to purchase renewable energy credits or carbon offsets to invest in and see the growth of renewable solutions. Or we have what we call mitigation, where we're just trying to mitigate or adapt. And what that means is we maybe in our particular role don't have the ability to change our utility provider or change if we are getting coal powered energy, but we can reduce the need to consume that coal power. So we focus on efficiency or energy efficiency. We focus on how to change our behavior and reduce our consumption. So those are kind of the two buckets. There's the completely avoid the use and switch over to renewable, and then there's the modify our behavior, try to reduce our dependency on them. And so that's kind of the primer. And what I like about that, I don't know if you're feeling hot and overwhelmed by it, but to me, that makes it pretty simple. Because it's like, okay, great. I have decisions I make, and now we're talking about touring. I have touring decisions to make. As a tour manager, I probably can't ask the venue to switch from coal power to solar power, right? That's not in my power. But I can let them know I care about that issue. I can ask the venue if they've made any effort and what their plan is, so they can know I'm one of the people who want to see that happen. And that one day that might influence what venue's chosen. But what I can do is I can look at and work with my lighting designers or my energy designers, not energy designers, but look at what the energy intensity of my tour is, or the choices we're making about what type of equipment. Are we using biodiesel generators or regular diesel generators? So there are smaller micro decisions that can allow us to reduce our consumption or create opportunities for new technology. And I think that's a great place to stop, because I didn't expect to talk that much. But I will mute there and see what that brings up for you guys.
No, that's great context. We really did have to rush through the last one to get everything in. So it's good to go a little deeper on these things and put a bit of explanation behind them. You said something yesterday that struck with me, and it's something that that I think is again applicable to other social issues that are going on in the world right now. And that is something to the effect of, we're no longer trying to convince people that it's real. We're trying to show people how it's possible to do something. And it's like,
Is everyone having trouble hearing him, or is that just me?
No, Doug for a moment. So
Doug.
go back about 10 seconds. Yeah, rewind about 10
you
seconds.
hear me now?
We heard you. Yeah. What
Okay,
I last
great.
heard you say was we're no longer fighting about if it's real. We're talking about how to have positives, like trying to talk, we're fighting about how to solve it or if to solve it.
Right. Yeah. And it seems like there's a growing, I don't know if it is growing, maybe you can tell me, but a growing school of thought to my mind of people that are just saying, obviously education is important, but at a certain point there's a section of society that are just going to be obstinate regardless, and they're going to stand in the way and they're going to question. So it's almost a case of just sidestepping them and saying, okay, well, we are going to do something about this. We are going to affect the change. You can come with us, or get left behind. And maybe that's overly simplistic, and I think it probably is. But you talked yesterday about performative, acting performatively rather than proactively, I guess. And did you have any thought? It just seems that there is a losing of patience right now, and people are going, you know what? if you're going to continue to say that wearing a mask in public is such and such, you know, we're just going to sidestep you.
I think I know where Doug's going, so I'm going to go ahead and venture to try to answer, and then Doug, either type in or feel free to interrupt. I'll create a pause so you can be heard again. But I do think I remember what we're talking about. I mean, so what's important to me, you know, my whole career has been about working with different decision makers to get them to buy in to these behavior changes. And as you know, because we've all been on the road, there is no political party to touring. There is, you know, we are the rainbow of every person and personality. And if anything, we're more inclined probably to anarchy or, you know, questioning than we are anything else. Those of us in live entertainment who know what it's like to build things and question what people tell us is possible. if we were to pick themes amongst us. But what I'll say is this, as someone who's trying to influence decision makers and empower them to make decisions that are actually in their best benefit, but they don't always, because of their political leanings or because of what they've heard or whatever the reasons are, they have resistance to climate change action or even talking about climate change, because that phrase got politicized, right? It became, you know, certain parties, certain people didn't feel even comfortable talking about climate change. But what I would say is this, we've moved the lexicon away from talking about, is it real or not? That's a moot point, because here is what I focus on. There are benefits in our life now that people we care about will experience now if we work on these, right? And that's where Mark, you know, whenever Mark and I are talking about this topic, he's like, hey, a lot of this stuff can save money if it's done right. You know, but it's not just that. I mean, almost everyone on this call probably knows someone that has asthma, or at least someone who's on the Asperger's or autistic spectrum. Those are two major illnesses that are directly linked to the increased toxins in our food stream and in our products and just based in the human experience based on the Industrial Revolution. If we work on climate change and work on the solutions and we focus, so I'm a possibilitarian. If I focus on what's possible and supporting people on improving their experience, even if there's a difficult, don't get me wrong, I'm a big champion of change, and change is difficult and that requires flexibility. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't go through hardship, but if I can point out that at the end of that hardship is actually efficiency or something that's better, that they can understand, I don't even need to worry about if they believe in climate change or not. And so that's part of what I'm saying, Doug. And then the other part of it is when people feel like they're not even allowed to express questioning about it, or if we get in debates about if it's real or the science is real or not, we start feeling like we have to go into our camps or we have to defend things that we don't really even need to be talking about. Like we could talk about, sorry, what I meant to say is performative action. What ends up happening is people are just so overwhelmed with it. They're like, okay, we'll buy carbon offsets and we'll just push the topic down, or we'll hire a vendor who's our green person, but we'll never listen to them and we'll just make them do everything on their own. And that becomes performative because we're just trying to check the box that we care. And my commitment to anyone I work with, and my request of everyone, is to engage on that individual granular level of how can we make this better? It's a conversation of how to make things better. And it's a conversation of what's possible. And the fact is, you can actually run backline on hydropower. Like, that's cool. Who wouldn't want to tell a story about running, you know, if your artist loves innovation and is into tech and likes to have a tech savvy audience, then why not bring tech into the mix? And so there's just so many ways to talk about what's possible and inspire people to action from a place of innovation and inspiration than to talk about a fear and like, hey, you better do this because you're going to die.
Right.
That's kind of where I'm going.
I love that term you used there. Was it possibilitarian?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Possibility.
That's amazing. I love that. I'm gonna start using that, and hopefully my internet is gonna stick with me for now. But so to move on to the practical applications in our industry, one of the big thing that always comes up is transport, and I think we touched on transport before, but I think this is a dual issue, and that's not maybe something that we didn't consider first time out, is that there is artist and crew transport, but there is also an even bigger issue of audience transportation,
Yeah,
Yeah, so Doug, I think I know where you're going with this because we talked yesterday.
I'm dealing with some slow Canadian internet right here. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, I was bringing up the issue of fan transportation, and if that's something that we can potentially, because that seems like something we don't necessarily have control over, but it could be something that we can affect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, well, I think the transportation, what I'd love to do is answer that question in the context of kind of, well, what are the carbon impacts of touring? Because we talked about that a little bit. And so, well, transportation is one of them. And there's two sides to that, right? There's the transportation you control as a tour manager, which maybe you don't even, depending on, so yes, great. John's like, why can't Tesla build a double-decker bus? If not Tesla, there's like 18 electric car companies that people don't even know are out there that are innovating truck trains, electric truck trains, and it's not Tesla, and it's so cool. But Tesla's dominating the mainstream marketplace, and I'm okay with that too. But where we are with this is transportation. So we've got, we all know that we're not in control of the routing. The green person's wet dream is that routing was done entirely with the environment in mind, and that you only chose to go places that were green venues, and you went in a way and in a timeline that was for maximum fuel efficiency and for minimum amount of diesel and or gasoline fuel consumed and burned, or miles traveled in an inefficient way. Like if we could use international freighting, if we could cargo ship things instead of flying things, that would be incredibly great for the footprint, but we know that's impractical for the timelines of tours. So moving beyond that, the thing that you can do, one of the big things on a crew transportation side is measuring. And I know that sounds really ridiculous, but a lot of the tours that do carbon footprinting are doing estimates. And one of the things that you can start to do is actually getting real data and having, working with your truck companies and your busing, and I'm sorry, I've got so much fun background noise, your bus companies, to get the real data. But where people get lost is actually if you're on a bigger tour, the band and the entourage travel, because there's a lot of driving miles that are done that are completely lost track of, or runner miles, and kind of going through and getting a good picture of what your actual total mileage is, because a lot of the consumption comes from burning gas. And it's the number one thing we could do for touring, and this is going to come up in a lot of different topics, is to equate getting better. And actually, Doug, you said something phenomenal yesterday I want to bring up here, which is the competitive nature of touring, right? How every tour wants to be bigger and better and competitive, like, oh, we're a 42 truck tour, we're a 50 truck tour. Like there's these bragging rights of how impressively large your transport was. Well, what we would be better serving the industry to do is equate better with efficiency. Like we were able to accomplish this with less. And that kind of mindset, in order to even get there, we have to start seeing the full picture. So everyone knows the mileage between the cities, but do they know the mileage once they're in the city? And it's not too hard to do. You just have to ask whoever's hiring your runners to keep track of how many, there's some formulas I can share offline that you can do to start to get that information. But just starting that conversation, that awareness, which drives more efficiency, having less runner trips, having more thought out, and it also helps save money, because if you do a better job of coordinating, now of course your smaller tours are already doing this, but on the larger tours there's a lot of loss in terms of some 5 different departments sending out runners at the same time to the same store and not knowing they're doing that, right? You would never have that on a bus tour, but you could have that on a stadium or an arena tour. And those so my number one recommendation is tracking and monitoring for crew stuff, and starting that conversation and keeping awareness and looking at opportunities to co-mingle and co-bundle trips. So that's what you can do. There's a lot of other things. I'm sure you guys have ideas. I'd love to hear what you guys have done or anything you've seen that helps be just more efficient with the use of transport when you're in the art of your tour. But that brings us to something that seems like it's out of your control, but is actually something that I think everyone here should know about, which is fan engagement, right? And fan travel, which is what Doug mentioned. If you're looking at the tour's carbon footprint, the biggest aspect of the carbon footprint is first fan transportation, and then second, your own transportation, the carbon footprint, and then third, the hotels that the artists stay in. So we'll get into that. But the first one, fan travel, you have no control over how fans get there. And fans will come from very far distances to come see you. But there has been a movement to incentivize fan behavior and incentivize carpooling or using public transit, or certain of those of us that live in cities that have these Lime or Bird or these these last mile scooters that you can rent for the last mile between public transit and your destination. Some venues have built sponsorships with them where they get free beverages when they, when you come, if you show that you took your transport there via one of these systems, you can get a free beverage. Some have carpool incentives where, a very famous one is Carpoolchella. Have you guys experienced Carpoolchella? But I always joked with the people, my friends at Coachella, that this was an easy one because people are carpooling to festivals anyway. But what they did is you decorate your car, it says Carpoolchella, to promote that you carpooled and encourage people to carpool 3 or more. And then one car randomly every year is selected, and those people get a lifetime pass to come back to Coachella, which is like for free.
That's amazing. I love that.
I love that too.
It seems so radical, but it's such that little incentive has literally, I think one year it was like 20,000 people decorated their cars as part of Carpoolchella. Now, we don't know if that changed their behavior, if they were carpooling already, but the fact that they went that extra mile energetically to put that, and they now are raising this awareness. LA is close to Coachella. LA is close to Coachella, and there are a lot of people who drive over on their own. So that is creating a culture of understanding that this is a carpool culture at this festival, and that's what's expected. But how does this relate to you as a tour manager?
I had a moment on that. I mean, we could do, we could offer a similar on a show by show incentive. Maybe it's a pair of fan upgrade tickets. If if the artist is holding back a pair of front rows, and we do our own little incentives for carpooling and somehow figure out a way to randomly select one of those folks, then we're in each market, maybe affecting a tiny bit of change. Just a note off of that.
Yeah.
That's where I went while you were chatting. I was
perfect.
Like, oh, how could we do that?
Exactly. And I know one of the big things in, VIP upgrades is like backstage tours, or like, just a little bit of a guitar pick or a string at the end of the show. Like there's so many little things you can do that go a long way with a fan that would incentivize that action. And Pavan's saying here that Carpoolchella cars during that season, you see them everywhere in California. So it's also great marketing, right? And I think that, Doug, I know you were really intrigued by what we could do is in your rider, when you're advancing with venues, you can ask them, do they have any incentives with public transit, or what's their relationship? Because you'll find there are some venues that already have built-in relationships that encourage public transit to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there very briefly the electric scooters and the bikes, the city bikes. I've noticed just in the last couple of years, since they became really prevalent especially in North American cities, that, prior to that, and everyone on the panel will be able to identify with this, the amount, just by submitting my receipts at the end of a tour, the amount of $6 Ubers that I put in, it's obscene for day room journeys, for little things to go to Guitar Center, for this and for that. And yet, okay, when the heat is on and you have an hour to show, yeah, that makes sense. But days off, crew movements around the arena, going a mile and a half, and now you have these other options that are $2 and they're electric, they're not using a car. I mean, that's a small drop in the ocean, but I've seen the culture of that change, and people, because they're fun, people want to go and do it. They want to jump off the bus and go jump on a Lime scooter and go down to the day room or their hotel room or whatever it is, or cruise around the city on their day off. I've seen crew members cover 30K on an electric scooter, jump off it because they ran the battery down, and then jump on a new one. So that, that is something that
our entire band and backline were the scooter gang on our last run. Everywhere we went, same scooter gang scooting around town, all of them. It was amazing.
But yeah. and sometimes all it takes is just a little nudge to the crew, like, look, these options are here for you if you want. If you, I don't know how, you can incentivize it from your crew. But if your day room is half a mile from the venue,
Yeah.
that's incredibly wasteful to be getting an Uber there. Anyway, sorry, carry on, Jen.
No worries. And one of the things that, and I just want you to know, we're reading your chats and I'm seeing things, and we will be coming back to these for sure. But one of the things that we talked about that you just tapped into, Doug, was culture changing. And as a tour manager, in your day sheets, both for on and off days, including information about bike racks, where the bikes are, because especially if you're on a tour where there's a lot of bicyclists, or including information on public transit, just that consistency. If that's one of the, if you advance a questionnaire to each venue or each hotel you're staying at and ask them to input that information for you, it just shows that level of awareness. It makes it a culture of acceptability. Similarly speaking, on an off day, if someone is going to the venue, like what showers are available for them the whole time. For biking, like sometimes the shower that, at loadout, showers are plentiful, but where are the showers not at loadout? And to encourage biking culture or kind of reward that behavior. So those are just small little cultural elements that say, yes, we as a culture on this tour are doing our best in every moment we can. And we know that you're trying with your own personal behavior. And then the last session, we talked about water bottles. It's the same thing. If you're doing a reusable bottle program, it's where, letting people know where they can wash their water bottles. Like that's a small little thing, but what sink could be dedicated? What's the best sink for that? Like you'll put soap in a toggle thing to wash your water bottles at. And that little detail will help if we're thinking as tour production and tour management to always put that out at a sink at every venue, then that reminds the crew to constantly bring their bottle to every venue.
Right.
Oops, sorry. Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, go ahead, please.
Well, there are a couple.
Touch on the dolphin pumps as well when we talk about how effectively we've managed to adjust some of the waste of the single-use water bottles.
Dolphin pump.
Asking the venues. We carry dolphin pumps, and we'll have 6 of them or 7 of them. Good morning, Anthony. Hi, how are you? Welcome. We'll have 6 or 7 of them. There you go, dolphin pump with a 5-gallon jug. So
I live with this guy.
Yeah. So instead of advancing multiple cases of water at load-in and in dressing rooms and so on and so forth, if you advance 11 or 12 5-gallon jugs and you've got a 5-gallon on stage left and a 5-gallon on stage right, and you've got 2 in catering and you've got 1 in every dressing room, you are eliminating so much plastic waste.
Absolutely. And Anthony just joined us. We're very excited to have you with us. We know how we're having our own technical challenges over here, so no worries.
So I think, Jen, this is an amazing segue from, because we're going to start talking now about, we'd like to talk about the whole food thing and the consumables. And I know that a lot of my colleagues and I have been troubled by the amount of waste that accompanies broad herd feeding, the feeding of many, many, many people. We've got to accommodate folks who need a bunch of energy to sustain themselves. We want to move towards keeping people healthy and healthier choices, because we also know that, high carbs and high fat and comfort food makes you feel better when you're dragging your ass for 18-hour days in a row with 2 hours of sleep bouncing down the highway. But that doesn't always fuel our bodies well, and we have a lot of leftovers, and after show food creates a ton of waste. So this would be the time to really chat about how we can get and the other thing that we chatted about yesterday, which for those of us who are in production and are dealing with food, the repurposing of food that's brought in and the pushback that we get from venues, particularly larger venues that might have a contract with a caterer that has a liability policy and so on. So if we can just launch right into food on tour and how we can become a little bit more sustainable and greener in that'd be amazing.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, and so just once again, touching a touch point back to episode 24, we talked about waste a lot on that topic. And so I told everyone here that it's going to go back to waste again, because waste is one of the most tangible hotbed issues that we all experience. But I also am committed to talking about topics we didn't get to. So there are a couple things. So Adrian, I want to answer all those questions. And then there's a couple things still left on transport I want to go back to, but let's go into food right now. And the reason food came up, because our intention today was to talk about climate, and what all the different climate impacts. But the thing about climate is that every single thing has a climate impact. And I don't say that to be overwhelming. I say that to be empowering, because at the end of the day, every single item that we consume was, and I talked about this last time, basically everything we interact with was at one point a raw material that was extracted and made into something useful that we're now using, and then we're going to waste it. And at each of those phases, from the taking phase to the using phase to the wasting phase, there are impacts. And food is actually one of the biggest areas of climate impact, because the amount of water it takes to make beef is insane. And the amount of methane gas that's released at cattle farms is insane. And then you can actually see air quality impacts in regions with cattle farming that are different and regions without it. And you can see water quality impacts in terms of the quality of water where pesticides are used, and those pesticides and stuff get into the food. And so from a climate and carbon impact perspective, the most intense carbon foods in the whole world are 4 things: beef, cheese, mainly because lots of cheeses are imported far distances, rice has huge methane off-gassing when you eat rice. And then right now, for some reason, I'm blanking on the 4th, so I'll have to come back to it. But I know it's beef, cheese, and rice. And I think the 4th one's in another animal product. I don't know why I'm forgetting the 4th, but maybe that's why I always list things in 3s. So I shouldn't have tried for 4. But what we could do, one of the biggest things we can do to make a climate impact is, one, encourage our venues to offer vegetarian options and vegan options to our fans. And that's, something we could include on our venue rider, just asking, do you have it? Where is it available? And do you promote it to your guests? We can encourage our artists to promote it to our guests, keeping the thought of crew and fan. That's the fan piece. On the crew side, it's, working with local catering and or any traveling caterers to make sure all your sides or your bases of your dishes are plant-based. So even if you're going to offer a protein, serving the protein on the side so someone can have a couscous or a risotto or something that then they add the meat onto, that allows you to potentially reduce the quantity of protein you're offering. And also it drives the chefs to find more protein-rich plant-based solutions. So from a climate impact stance, one of the biggest things you could do is the food choices you make. And then you start talking about the human experience, because one of the things I'm a big advocate of is you can't talk about sustainability without human wellness, because, and that's where Anthony's a real advocate for regenerative thinking, regenerative systems. And you can't regenerate without nurturing, and you can't regenerate without nourishing. So we really need to think about nourishment and nurturing. And that's where, Adrian, you just brought this up, which is a lot of times somehow the touring world got stuck on, after long days, we need to give comfort food, mac and cheese, pizza, like fried chicken. I'm just trying to think of the most comfort meals I had on the road. The fact is, there's some phenomenal science on when you are low energy and when you're drained and when your immune system's compromised, like a smoothie, like a turmeric, smoothie with some turmeric in it, like anti-inflammation foods, things that keep your inflammation down, things that energize you, and they taste delicious. They're not bad tasting things, but there are some really great warm dishes you can make that are each really nutrient rich. Like people use, right. I'm going to say something that doesn't sound great, but there's this really great mung bean, like grain bowl that I've had on the road that right. like I don't cook with mung beans. They kind of, they're weird sounding and they're new to me, but when it was prepared properly, it was delicious. And it turned out I had more protein and nutrients than if I had done a rice bowl.
100%. Yeah. But let's be super realistic about the number of mung bean bowls I'm going to be able to find warm at midnight in Duluth.
So,
you know what I mean? Anthony, good day. Join us.
Hi guys, thanks so much.
Hi.
I'm excited to be here. By the way, I think you'll find it was either dark chocolate or coffee were probably the other two large impact.
Yes, thank you.
Interesting. Okay, nice one. Yeah.
You know, I think one of the interesting things for all of everyone here is to consider is ritual, right? Like one thing that touring teaches you is ritual, right? We load in, we load out, we travel, like we have these rituals, and pizza and after food become a ritual, right? I can tell you that, you know, the amount of complaints about the pizza, but then the complaints when the pizza's not there is phenomenal. You know,
well, you know what after show is it's the gang that has literally been at it for 12, 14, 16 hours. You know, catering goes up for dinner at 5 o'clock. Now it's 2 and it's 7 hours later and you're now still on an empty stomach again.
Well, I think
our challenge is always how, because that's a real thing. People are starving and super hungry. And we have, you know, our challenge in this moment, which by the way starts at 11 o'clock in the morning when we start to think about after show food, and we're thinking about waste, and we're thinking about, can it be reheated for those guys that are the last guys taking things down out of the ceiling, and how many times we run for it, because you've got your guys, your backline guys that are done 30 minutes after the show's down. But then you've got guys that are still rolling in an hour and a half, 2 hours. Is it one run? Is it 2 runs? Do you know what I mean? There's all these things. And the unfortunate part of the unfortunate reality is that after show food is an afterthought to everyone that isn't eating it. For example, the people who need it the most are the ones that are working. And we've got to try and the budget. So when I say that, I mean that the budget is often quite low for after show food. We don't have $20 a head for what it costs to do a healthy meal that we might be able to keep warm. So there's warming issues, there's location and accessibility and the ability to acquire it in a moment. Do you know what I mean? That's the kind of stuff that we are challenged with. And my fellow colleagues are all going to agree. We try to keep it healthy. We got to have it warm. But first of all, we got to at least have it, because sometimes the closest thing is, you know, we may still be sending a runner 30 minutes each direction to get the first speck of food.
And what you're actually talking about is infrastructure, and what's available is actually one of the biggest challenges that we face across the board in all topics, right? Not just with sustainability, not just with food, like from a waste perspective, where compost is available, where food donations available, every single thing that's important to us is impacted by the city we're in and what they have available to us, right? And I think there's some cities that just don't. It's like when you start hoarding and purchasing things in X city because you know it's not available in Y city,
right?
And I think that so it comes back down to, well, what are the workarounds? And in that case, yeah, go for it.
I think I would like to try to move us past this a little bit, because it sounds like I'm just finishing a show and we're all arguing about after show food, by the way. So, yeah. You know, and this vibe of it, I'm wondering if it's more of a question of culture. Like, how do you look? A lot of these things become ingrained in us because we put them in our programs, and that's the program we have. I'm curious to know if there's not a conversation around, like, how do we, and this goes back to the health and wellness / food part. You know, we have quite a long time ago, we tried to go healthy on tours, right? And try to keep our staff and our crew and our teams more healthier. I'm curious to know, is this a symptom of not doing enough to make sure the health and wellness for everybody is taken care of? Like, is this just a symptom of like not making sure like there's somewhere to meditate or there's somewhere to get healthy food as a constant? So that's what you want to do, is you want to be healthy, and that becomes more of the topic than the pizza. So I'm curious to know, is like, what are the cultural things we can do that encourage everyone to think healthier, be healthier? I know that you've had some really great tour managers on the show that have talked about health and wellness on the road from a yoga perspective and how yoga can inform it. Is it more about the balance of the whole program that then steers us away from doing it anyway?
Yeah, I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, and I think that's a good point. I mean, I think there is a culture that we have of after show food. It's ingrained in us that this fourth meal is something that we get, and it has to be there. Although there's also the other side of Adrian, where a lot of guys are working. It's the first meal of the day where they can actually sit down and relax and enjoy what they're eating versus you going to catering, eating something, and have to go back to the stage to work on whatever you're working on.
Oh, here's
So there's
how
that
I
fine
would,
line, but I think the culture, I think Anthony's right about the culture of it being that we could find alternatives to that maybe aren't what we're doing, but there's somewhere in between that we could compromise on it.
Because what if it was like, I think the idea is that fourth meal is a social thing, right? It's like, I've worked all day, I earned that, I want that meal, right? So there's a culture in that. I'm just curious to know if that doesn't start in the morning with reculturing new solutions to the way we do things. Like, is it more about the program we build? We get in the morning, everyone gets 30 minutes. Some people go meditate, some people go run. Is there an exit at the end of the day that's a slightly different exit where, there's people doing other things versus just after show food? And by the way, we all know we get hungry. We've just done 13 hours. So I'm not taking away from the need of it, but I'm just curious, it's like, is there not a better balanced daily program that makes you not want to eat the pizza anyway, because you're now feeling a little bit more healthier and your well-being's a little bit better, and actually I now want to go do some meditation or some yoga or for a run versus eat pizza? So I just wonder if there's a steer towards health, wellness, and food that helps us get away from some of these challenges that are more systematic.
One of the things that I did on a tour last summer to speak to that is, instead of just blanket ordering massive numbers of tacos, burgers, chicken, whatever it was that we were doing, I had a text chain by bus. And I would literally reach out to them all and say, who's eating tonight? Do you have something on the bus you'd like to have? Can we, and I had a dialogue with them that we had bus doc and we had after show. And if there was something that they would prefer to prepare for themselves that's on the lighter side, like a smoothie or some yogurt or something else or some fruit. And what I found was it was a little bit more work for me because it focused on every single person, but our waste decreased unbelievably. Our expense increased unbelievably because we weren't buying a number of food items, hoagies, gyros, whatever, that were just going to sit there because people weren't going to eat them. So that was, to your point, how we kind of changed the culture a little bit, is saying, do you want after show food? Some people were ordering their bits already via bus doc and having a nosh, and that was the end of their day.
Right. So and Olga's jumping in here saying that some tours are embracing a fasting culture where there's food on the bus, but they're not providing an actual meal at the end. I mean, I think Anthony, I guess one of the things we had agreed upon, and we all know, and I think we said it, but I want to say it again, is that our goal with our conversation here is to share some of the insight from the environmental knowledge perspective and then discuss, but there's so many ways to solve it, right? Mm-hmm. And part of our challenge is just to name the problem so we can start to see it more clearly. And I think that's what we're doing, right? We're teasing out this kind of unknown, just a sense that we have of what doesn't work. And we're starting to get to see it a little bit better. And I think, Anthony, I love that invitation. And I'm not sure if you were on the call when we were talking about how, sustainability and wellness are one and the same in that way, right? And so I agree. It really comes back down to the environmental program, much like some other commitments, shouldn't be an add-on or something you just hand to catering to handle, or you just handle, I don't think it works if you just hand it off to one person. I think it's a commitment that has and we talked about this as potential tools and resources and a rider. It's a commitment that there's a commitment statement for the tour that kind of sets forth what the commitment is, what the values are of the tour, right? What's the values of the tour in terms of well-being for the crew and well-being for the community and stuff. And from that value statement, we then go into, well, what does that mean for everybody? And everybody has a small piece of the puzzle, right? And that small piece could be very small for some departments. Some people's piece of the puzzle is purely to use the reusable water bottle and participate in the catering chop like choices, right? Maybe that is the extent of their participation. And for others, it's taking this extra step. So Adrienne, I think you're talking about that, for whoever's running advancing, it's adding more questions to your questionnaires and getting just a little bit more information in advance. So I think we're doing a good job of identifying the little things we can do, but also trying to think about the bigger way to reframe it, because we want the solutions and the innovation. And I think, so we've got a couple of different comments coming through in a couple different threads. We want to go back to the food waste conversation, which Adrienne, you brought up a question about, which is, And then I just wanted to acknowledge here, because I mean, there's a lot of great comments. So if you aren't able to see the chat, if however your view is, I would just recommend you change your view to see the chat, because there's a lot of great recommendations. We're not going to be able to cover all of them, but there's some great experiences in here. But, you know, someone went on a tour with a vegan artist whose whole tour practiced veganism for the duration of the tour, and they were able to find vegan options everywhere. And I think I just want to shout out to that. The culture in the United States has shifted, and Anthony's dead on when it's a culture thing. There's a culture of understanding that there are going to be vegans in any population of eaters, and it is no longer an offensive request to ask a restaurant or a food provider, even if they don't have something on menu, to provide a vegan option. And at this point, there is that understanding, that's the cultural growth. Okay, but let's talk about the food waste thing for a second. So very quickly, in the United States, there's a Good Samaritan clause that is written in such a way that should protect anyone who chooses to give cooked food to a person, you know, leftover foods to a homeless person or an institution that delivers food to those in need. However, because it's such a broadly written law, there have been people who've gotten sick from food and sued. And so even though the law itself is written broadly and should protect all foods, people look at that legal precedent, and larger organizations have kind of gotten a little bit more risk adverse. And so there's a general rule of thumb, which is that if a food was cooked and not served, it is easy to donate. So when you hear that Staples Center or Madison Square Garden or these big arenas have a food donation program, what they're doing is, if they cooked 1,000 hot dogs and 200 of those hot dogs never left the kitchen or never were uncovered with cellophane, they just sat on a cooking rack, those 200 hot dogs will be donated to Rocket Wrap It Up or Angel Harvest, or a group that will then bring them to a shelter. But if 800 of those hot dogs, 400 went into the sweeps and they were not eaten, but they were uncovered and presented for option to eat, that becomes an unknown jurisprudence, and they could have been tainted by someone else. And so those will not be donated. So even though we like to laud and celebrate that a lot of food is donated, there's still a huge portion of food that was cooked and presented or served but not eaten that doesn't get donated. And a lot of the crew food falls into that category, right? Because a lot of crew food is served even if it's not eaten, or at least it's displayed. And so that comes into a place of, there's a lot of the organizations that we rely on, like Angel Harvest, Rocket Wrap It Up, won't take that food. And so it requires more legwork on our part to find people who will take it. And it's possible, but it does require advanced outreach to the Angel Harvest group and saying, hey, do you know anyone? And oftentimes what I told Adrian, I've been able to find people who work for Angel Harvest or work for a local homeless shelter who on their own would be willing to come pick up stuff and be willing to take it. But that they're taking on that risk as an individual, but the organization won't take that risk. And right. So I think someone mentioned here as a nice tie-in, Doug, that they use their scooter. They use a scooter to take food left over from catering out to homeless people sometimes, which is a pretty cool double use of alternative transportation and making sure food doesn't go to waste. But Adrian, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that, or other piece of that puzzle in terms of?
I didn't. It's just, when we talk about, sometimes there's trays of food that are left over, and we look and we go, this is trays of food, and then right. We have the conversation about the laws and repurposing and so on. So I feel like it's super important to keep that part of the conversation top of mind amongst all of us who went,
Well, MJ had a suggestion and a comment on this yesterday, and these are all small impacts that we can make, but they add up to something greater collectively. I think one of the biggest food waste issues on the tour side of things is creating a standard hospitality rider, sending out your standard hospitality rider and not amending it day by day per needs. So, for example, your artist may want mustard on the rider. You're going to ask for a jar of mustard every single night of the tour. You're going to end up with 46 jars of mustard on the bus. Maybe 5 of them get opened because what happens? People come back to the bus, they're tired, they've had a few drinks or whatever. They dig into the first thing they see, and again, very small example, but if you take a bit more time to prepare your rider and send it out day by day per show with what you've got on the bus, with what you don't need, then you're not going to be left with this issue where you're having to manage a bunch of waste after the fact. And there's a couple other things on the bus you could do to smoothie maker. You know, fruit goes, if the fruit starts going bad after a couple of days, you can make it into a smoothie and it will last longer. You can, if the bus has a freezer, you can freeze the fruit, use it for days longer than you would have been throwing it out prior. Or a sandwich maker on the bus, just little things like that that can allow your rider to go further. And, you know, at the same time, that's going to save you money. But, you know, that was just you know, something that Mary Jo chipped in with yesterday. And I think it's important because on a wider point, we in this industry do things because other people do them, because that's the way it's been done before. And I think it's just about breaking out of that mindset. And Anthony, that was kind of speaking to what you were saying earlier. We build our riders because that's what all the other tour managers we see do. And if we can kind of break out of that mindset and start being a bit more proactive on that front, I think we can make a bit of a difference on there.
Yeah, and Doug,
one of the things that I've done too on that is with my rider is I've staggered my rider too. Like say on condiments, I only get on Mondays. I get once a week condiments on Mondays, bread once a week. So you're breaking it down, saying Monday I get this, Tuesday I get this every day. And that's a simpler way of doing that. If you don't have the time to send in everywhere, you're wearing 10 hats, you know, to do that. One way to do that is just say, I don't need this every day. I just need this on Mondays, or realizing Sundays and Mondays you are often off days. So you put the thing that you don't need. So you might get a Monday show every 2-3 weeks. You put your condiments on that day, because you get your condiments on that day. I'm also, one thing, I just got a text from Paul Bradley at Master Tour. And I know when Paul, one of the things he talked about was this new feature they have for tagging restaurants and stuff in towns. And one of the things that he said is one of the things they're trying to do is it's kind of a Yelp for touring crews. So we can put healthy options, and we have a database of places that we can go that we have put into the database that we can go back to and go, this tour went here, let's try this place. And so that helps with it gives us something better than just Yelp. It's touring specific, that what other tours have found in different cities around different venues that we can use for after show food or meal options also.
Yeah.
Hey, can I chime in for 1 second? I'm sorry, Anthony. What I do is when we have college shows and we have tons of leftover food, I just tell the students, take whatever you want, go clean out the dressing rooms, just take it all, because college students they don't usually have a whole lot of money, and they are really receptive to taking all that free stuff. So add that to your list. I mean, it's small but mighty.
Right. Yeah, that's a great one, 5-1. Thank you. And also, if we have leftover beverages, you know, even sometimes there are beers and things like that, we let the stagehands know, please, when you're done, please come back and help yourself to all of this. You know, they just love that. And it lets them know also that you're thinking about them, because they might also be hungry and thirsty and feel like getting a little love. So we like that as well. Jim, we did that night after night. People's habits change. Sometimes, you know, somebody's on a drinking spree and sometimes they're not. So you never know what gets left behind.
And that, I think that comes back to the culture piece, which is that I think, you know, what's beautiful, and I'm seeing this in the commentary too, is that, you know, a lot more crew members want juicing. A lot more crew members want a custom diet, you know, gluten-free. There's a lot of customizations as people have become more informed and committed to their health. And someone made a comment that we're eating healthier because we don't want to, you know, we want to last, we don't want to repeat the mistakes of our forefathers or foremothers in this community. But, you know, I've been on a tour where people's bodies were literally breaking down. You had someone throwing an arm out. I mean, we always have injuries, but it was like, it was an old guard that was getting injured. And we know it was an old guard that was getting hurt because they had habits from a different era. And it was, you know, it was a beautiful cautionary tale of,
and I think that the waste culture is, to Anthony's point about the whole culture of it, I think we're trying, when we walk in the door, to set up better practices not to over order, because there was a culture of over ordering and over just, you know, the whole herd feeding and watering mentality was a culture of over ordering.
Right. Yes. And also a similar issue we have, especially when you're dealing with hospitality and band, is presentation. This obsession with having full presentation, right? So no one wants to show a tray that's half full. So even in catering for 200 people that you all know each other, you're the crew, they still want the tray to look full so you don't feel like you're near the end, if you know what I'm talking about, in certain settings. And that culture needs to be changed as well. It's like, hey, let's feel good about the fact that we're down to the last few. If you need it, ask, we'll make more, but let's celebrate that we're using it up. Especially, getting buy-in from the artists in a VIP setting, that like, we're going to give you exactly what you need. You're going to enjoy, it's a weird thing. I think that's a little radical idea, because I know in the VIP setting, we really want it to look abundant.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole point, right? Like, I think that unless we culture new ideas from the top down, look, artists are, by the very nature of them, culture builders, right? That's what they do for a living. They build culture. We are the supporters of the people that build culture. And so if we build new cultures around how we think about things, then we're pretty shocked that everyone goes along like they just do. So I think if, we talked about the idea of new language in the front of the tour book or in the front of the rider, I think that as you start to think about language and you start to think about culture and you start to think about top down, I think just by the very nature of starting with the, hey, less is more, and hey, we're at less is more tour, then I think you're completely right. That visual that we get of like, we have to have the full plate and we have to have the full room to make it feel better, is how we have to change the viewpoint. We've got to change the lens or the optics in which we see, unless there's a full plate of meat, we're not happy. If we change that viewpoint, it's like, shit, yeah, look, there's less stuff out, like that's a celebration, and everyone starts celebrating that, then everyone starts to see it differently because they feel differently about it. And I think that's a critical part of this.
Yeah, like, hey guys, look, we did our part to eat right, to right size our order.
Yeah, you guys did amazing today. Look, we didn't waste anything. If you start celebrating them small wins culturally, they start to become every day, right?
Yeah. And I think, well, there are two things that remind me. That's one of the topics we did want to get to today that actually that didn't get to enough last time, was that culture change and the engagement piece, which, Anthony and I love talking about this, which is maybe my phrasing is different. So I'll expect Anthony to come in here and offer a different perspective per se, but it's about emotionally intelligent communication. And there's so much, such small things we can do to just create a cohesive cultural experience. And I think I mentioned in the last session, episode 24, I'm really pushing that touch point there, about how with recycling signage, you can have kind of emotionally clever recycling signage that speaks in the tone of the artist or the tone of the tour to the crew member. It goes similarly speaking throughout, I like to think of, from the moment a crew member arrives on my crew, as a sustainability person on a crew, but I like to take ownership and take up space. So when they arrive on my crew, what's their first experience? Is it a logistics form that they fill out for me? Is it a crew tour book? And I think from every moment of touch point where they see the institution of our tour, the organization of our tour, what is the message I'm sending them? So I want a question in the logistics about their dietary, right? We already do that, but I wanted to say, and not just what's your dietary restriction? Are you willing to eat vegan 75% of the time? Or are you willing to participate? We're doing a, carbon-based meat reduction. Are you willing to do a meat reduced diet with us? And like those kind of questions or things that you can start to bring in early. And in the crew tour guide, you have a whole piece on wellness and what wellness means and what we're going to be doing for wellness and these different adaptations, but what that looks like in the tour room. And actually, Aaron mentioned something here I think is really big, is how do we treat the locals that we work with, right? Because one other big piece I know, Doug, I know this is on your heart because it's come up every time we've talked, which is this moment of awareness and justice that we're having, right? And actually, David, you brought this up about inclusion and how there's an inclusion writer. There is a culture change that's shifting, that's been happening very slowly, about truly having a culture of belonging. So that way you actually create an environment where people who are different or people who are not the same race or the same economic status, or maybe not even as experienced in touring, still feel as they belong in the crew room with you, with the old salty sea dogs and the people who've been there for years. And it's going to be hard to get diverse perspectives and diverse people on crew if you don't have a culture that's welcoming when they get there. And so if we really, and similarly speaking, if we talk about wanting to really respond to the community when we're in a city, we also want to treat the local crew in a way that makes them feel like they're a part, an extension of our brand for that day. So there's something, Aaron, you mentioned here, stagehands need permission from supervisor to get catering leftovers. Like having that be the plan, that your leftovers are available for the loadout, the local hands, and having that, you know, and having messaging. So it's not just like, oh, we had leftovers here, but just not that, you know, just having a sign that, you know, that's already made that says, we care about you too. Thanks for waiting for us. Here's our, you know, some food or something. But there are things that we can do to set the tone for inclusion and belonging that will create a culture of care and a culture of awareness. And I think that from a culture of care, a culture of mindfulness is where, and this doesn't have to be political. Notice how I'm not using any political language here. I'm just trying to create a baseline where people can feel like they belong, so they can ask for what they need, and then they can contribute their best. So I think, you know, we've been talking offline about tools, and I think resources, and we were talking about what would it look like to have a master writer that had inclusion and sustainability and wellness and all of these pieces as part of the writer experience.
Yeah, I think I wonder if, you know, going back to just an education of like the impact of beef, for instance, you know, and having one less meat meal can sometimes be an easier palatable conversation than vegetarian or veganism. I think some of the challenges we have as humans is that, you know, the don't tell me what to do scenario is like, especially if you're using certain words and certain phrases. So I think this sort of like simplification of things and reduction can be as simple as, you know, meatless Mondays, or, you know, it's like, you know, like through the week starts to sort of say, well, what is the impact of beef on the planet? I don't think we really considered that, but I would say that Impossible Burger did a great job of addressing the fact that they created a in vitro meat product that 2-3 years ago wasn't as popular, but is now, because they've managed to put it in the Whopper and it kind of looks like that. So I also think that there is more interest now than ever. And I think that giving people the information is going to be critical. So I do wonder if we couldn't make also like a page of impact, like, you know, per kilogram, lamb and mutton, by the way, are the two biggest impacts, right, in terms of like usage, followed by beef. And maybe we could start to sort of talk about them things in the context of the why. You know, we're going to do Meatless Mondays because of the impact of beef and methane on the planet, and here's the information underneath it, which exists everywhere for people to Google and look up themselves. So I think we have to marry like the culture, the inspiration with enough facts that people can see that impact and then educate themselves and actually have the facts. So to your point, Jen, it doesn't become political. It just becomes, look, guys, this is the impact of the beef burger, or this is the impact of coffee, or this is the impact of nuts. Like, we really need to look at them things and see if we can marry that. And I do wonder if we couldn't put together just some information for people on the impact of food as it attains to extraction versus the impact of, you know, when we discard it. And then even just the thought process of, oh, if I reduce down what I intake and I reduce down what my impact is, and I'm part of that kind of culture, then in just by my reduction of not taking it on in the first place, I'm not in the extraction business. There's a great word called extraction, by the way, for those that aren't familiar with these terms. So we have two types of businesses. We have extractive businesses, which are businesses that extract from the planet, and net positive businesses, which are businesses by the nature of being in business, they give a return to the planet. And so there's a big push to work toward net positive businesses that help regenerate the planet versus the extractive businesses that just like take stuff out of the ground, we consume it, and then we put it into waste. And I think that that reduction is a critical understanding on us as humans and our impact on the planet, regardless of your position on climate and non-climate. Like, if we know and think about reduction as a thought process, we may start to think about what we need. And then health and wellness with that is like, do we really need to eat another burger at 11 o'clock at night? No. But the culture of it is we do, because it becomes comfort food, and also we hang out with our friends. Look, the smoking thing is like, if you can't get people to stop smoking, how do you get them to stop eating beef? How do you get them to stop, you know, doing things that aren't good for them? So I think the whole tour wellness thing, I think, still speaks to information and facts mixed with health, wellness, and feelings. So I'd say, like, just even maybe sharing, what we could do is build into the writer factual information around the impacts of food in catering and that extractive cost. That would actually be just a one pager that just says, per kilogram of food, like lamb and mutton is like 369,000 kilograms, right? Like if we could just give that information, I think that might actually help people be informed. So I think we need a little bit of data in there for people too.
And very, very practically, one of the things that I've, given away all my trade secrets because I want everyone to do them. So please take them. They're not that big of a deal. I mean, they are. Don't get me fired. Okay. Anyway, one of the things that
quickly, you made a really good point earlier, and I just wanted to touch on it real quick about changing the culture in your own team. And I think the important thing there is just to be upfront with your team in advance of the tour. Don't suddenly spring healthy food after show or something like that mid-tour when they're tired, they haven't slept for 4 days properly. Because if they know in advance what the culture of the tour is going to be and that you're simply not going to be ordering shitty food after the show, they're going into it. And if they want shitty food after the show, because let's be honest, not all crew are going to be up 30 minutes before load in meditating. If you give them 30 extra minutes, they're going to sleep for 30 extra minutes, guaranteed. And that's probably a large proportion of the crew. Same if I've run into this myself, just ordering vegan food post-show, and a bunch of people like, well, I'm not eating that crap. I'm going to go. And then they get pissed at you because, they're tired and they just want some food and they didn't know you were going to go to this great vegetarian or vegan place. Anyway, if they know in advance, they can prepare for it and then they're aware of it. And if they still want to go and get Burger King after the show, have at it. But the tour is not going to be engaging in that. That's maybe...
Right. And Doug, I think one of the things someone said earlier is also, it's like, I think someone that worked with Henry said, we started doing this kind of Whole Foods grab. The first week it wasn't popular, the second week it was. I also think there's got to be a bravery in the conversation now. We got to be brave in being okay with being different. We got to be brave and being okay with saying we're doing it this way. It's not an enforcement. It's more like this is just our choices. So I'd sort of maybe even lean into like Dave or Jim there on the language of this. So how do we just change the language of the conversation? So like, from, doing this for so long, we know the sensitivities of crews because they work so hard and we want them to be happy and food is a critical part of it. But how do we lean into okay, we're just going to be brave. We know you guys are going to throw bricks at us for a couple of weeks, but we're going to be brave and we're going to say, you know what? We've chosen this route because it's healthier for you. It's better for you guys. And you can hate on us, but you know what? We're the parents of the tour right now. We are the tour managers and we are saying we want our crew to be happy. And by the way, you're not all going to be happy, but we're leaning this way. And I think there's some question there because we get very sensitive around making sure our cultures are good. But, having a 7-year-old, I spend my life, reinforcing this. It's like my 7-year-old loves broccoli. And one day someone said to me, chocolate covered broccoli. And I said, no, broccoli. And he said, well, I'd rather it be chocolate covered broccoli because they eat broccoli. I said, no, I'd rather my son grows up knowing broccoli is good for him versus having to cover it up and then he doesn't own it because he doesn't understand it. So I wonder if we could talk about being brave in this period of time. We're going through the pandemic. We're going through a period of by the way, longevity, if anyone's not familiar with it, is the study of long-term medicine. It's the fastest growing industry in the world right now. Like they are saying that, we may live to 100 very soon just by changing our diet and just by changing the way we live. And so I actually think health and wellness may be a critical component here to say, look, if we actually eat healthy, we will live longer, we'll be happier lives, instead of eating. So I don't know, maybe there's some language in there, but feels to me like longevity, health and wellness is a good kind of trigger point.
Yeah. And I guess what I was going to say about my trade secret is that ultimately, I like to think of each tour date as a programming opportunity. And I like to think of my assets for programming with the crew. And my assets are, if I have a message and I have this mission of communication, I have the crew guide, the tour book, I have daily call sheets. These are my assets. And then I have the catering tables. And I think this is, because I've worked at AEG where I think about marketing and sponsorship assets. And I also was a resident assistant at my college. So I think like a resident assistant sometimes where it's like table tents are actually really valuable. It seems really silly, but like you think about each show night as an opportunity to put up a table tent with a piece of information. You go back to what Anthony was saying and it's like, okay, I just, you can ask an intern, you can ask someone, say, we're gonna have 32 show dates. I need 32 tips and how they connect. And so you have a different table tent at each show for catering, lunch and dinner. And that it's the smallest little thing that allows you to kind of inform and engage and think about the different content moments that you have, because at the end of the day, this is just one small piece of the big picture, and the show must go on, and we are here for the show. And so, you know, I think a lot of and I hear you, and I love this request for us to be brave, Anthony. And I think that we can. I think it's a combination of, you know, being practical and brave, and recognizing that opportunity, that how much bravery we need to take something practical and make it happen. Because oftentimes what's happening isn't that practical, but it's what's comfortable and familiar.
Yeah.
And so it's being
But
perpetuated.
Jen, the question comes down to this, right? Like, we're braver when we know we don't have a lot of time, right? So if I say, hey, you got 10 years, then I'll be as brave as the cycle of 10 years. We always say, you know, like, we'll get it done. How much time and money have I got, right? It's like, you know, you can have as big a show you want. The planet right now is in a real crisis moment, right? And I will say this because I don't think anyone's going to look at this now for 6 months to a year, but I will tell you that post-pandemic, our next biggest conversation will be climate, period. So we're either going to be brave and lean into the right stuff, or we're not going to be brave and we're going to lean into the wrong stuff. And I'm still going to advocate for this because the entertainment industry, specifically the live business, has been on the forefront of innovation longer than any other business. We innovate in a faster, quicker fashion because we get to build and test every day, right? It's called rapid prototyping. We rapid prototype our shows every single day, but we're not rapid prototyping our culture. If we try and test new ideas every day on the road, we may come up with innovations that no one else has. So I think that the tour managers, the production managers, the artists can innovate in this space faster and quicker than anyone else, because they look, you know, we were talking, Doug's going to go and do a show that no one else has done, right? He's doing a drive-in. He's going to learn more by doing that show than any of us sitting here talking about it ever, right? And guess what? He's going to have a manual that none of us have, that we're like calling Doug up and say, hey, Doug, what do we do? Like, it is down to this industry, specifically these crew with this experience, to decide to innovate and be brave or not, right? We can sustain, which means we could be in a lot of trouble in 2 years, especially if you look at the IPCC report, or we can say, hell, we've been innovating in technology for a long time, let's innovate in this space too. And let's really think about extractive versus like regenerative, and really how do we push to that? And Jen, I know that you've been in the business for a while, so you've been stuck behind a lot of these challenges, right? These doorways of like, well, production can't because the tour didn't route, and because the artist didn't want to, and because. But the truth is, the pandemic says we have an opportunity to innovate. We're all sat at home. We can learn, right? Or we can go back to how it was before. So I'm always going to like advocate for innovation, because that's what I just got paid to do when I ran tours, to build the most innovative tour. And so I'm still going to say this group has the biggest opportunity ever and the most exciting opportunity ever to innovate in ways that it's never done before. But you can only do that if you talk about it in that way. If we say we want to go to the moon, we get to the moon. If we say we want to go next door, we're going to get next door. Like, you know, what conversation do you want to have? Sustainability or innovation? So I'm going to advocate for innovation.
Right. And I think, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head. Like, even so, I just messaged the panelists. There's like 3 topics I want to try to bring up because I've seen them in the comments, and I want to make sure I close out. And I'm a great incrementalist, and I also hate that I'm a great incrementalist, because I'm also a great innovation person. But because I've gotten in bed with these people, you know, these industry titans. A lot of my career has worked either with AEG or Live Nation, tours, festivals, productions, or venues. So I'm working with these behemoths with lots of momentum. And because of that, I definitely, I want to just make sure that there's a tension that I absolutely love that exists between Anthony and I, because I don't, you know, and you said it actually yesterday, I think you said you don't want perfectionism to beget progress, right? And I think
over progress. It's like, don't focus on perfection, just focus on progress.
Right, and it's that same thing. So I think for me that philosophically applies. So what I like about what he's saying, and I want to keep, and then I want to jump back as if I didn't hear it, is that if we're using the same language and the same lens, if we're using the same pair of broken glasses to try to solve and see, find a solution, then we're not going to be able to see the full spectrum of colors or what's available to us. And so we get to actually change how we talk about this and change the paradigm. So we give ourselves permission to truly innovate. I hear you. And I want to talk about incrementalism. for a second. Okay. No, I'm just making fun of myself, but there were three quick things. One, there was a question about hydropower backline. And actually, I think this ties directly, Anthony, into that innovation concept. To date, to fit into the limited framework, what we've been able to do is take a hydrogen power car, charge up the battery of that car, which is powered by hydropower, or you can charge it at a solar facility, and then turn on that car at a venue and run backline from the battery, from the charge on the battery of the car. So instead of burning fuel to run that, you're burning water, and the battery was extra turbocharged by solar power before it came. And we were able to do an entire U2 concert in Tokyo like that. And we've done it in the US. And so that's an example of, to make that happen right now, you need a couple different partners involved, but it could happen pretty quickly. I mean, you would need access to a fleet of 2 to 3 hydropower vehicles. And that's a modern day incremental workaround. But if we can make that happen literally within 12 hours of coordination, it didn't take long to coordinate. What could we do if we took that and said, what would it be like to travel with that always, and to always have backline powered by hydrogen power? So there's, coming up with this incremental effort now gives us a chance to we should be challenging ourselves to think on a bigger scale. So I wanted to stress that hydrogen power piece.
Jane,
and then I want
to put one thing in there, because I think it's a critical part there, which is, we talked about a lot about how health and safety evolved over the years, and how Jim Digby's just done an amazing job at the Events and Safety Alliance to bring that to the fruition. We have to do the same thing in this space. We have to think about advancing and planning and building in this space in the same way. Otherwise, what happens is, I think the sum of all parts don't become the change, right? I think that whether you're talking about food waste or you're talking about hydrogen, it is part of the same dialogue, right? It's part of the same process and thought process. And I think that the more you speak on innovation and the more that you share these ideas that it's possible, I think the more you'll get the other departments also thinking about, oh, so the backline department have done that. Awesome. What can we do in catering, or what can we do in lighting, or what can we do in sound, or what can we do in trucking? Like I will tell you, and if anyone knows this, but there's many car manufacturers that have declared they're not going to make a combustion engine or gas fuel car again. Sorry, petrol in England. They're just not making them. Volvo will not make another petrol and or gas vehicle, right? That innovation is here. It's not in 10 years. We're not talking about something that we have to worry about. And that's happened. So let's talk about it as today, not as it was incrementally as you've come through the challenge, because you've come through an industry that from the very beginning that had to fight. You've got friends now. You're here. We're with you.
We're here.
For this.
And I think, and actually, Anthony, what we started out by saying as a recap is the problem of climate and the solution is easy. The solutions are here. The technology is here. We can be doing things on renewable energy. We can be powering these shows on renewables. We can be reducing our consumption. Like, it has been proven. We just need to put the time in to adapt it to our particular use case. That's all that's needed. And that's really a completely surmountable challenge, which is phenomenal. Okay, there are two other things. I'll be really quick because I want to turn it back over to our hosts to get to it, which is one about crew transport. No idling. This is an inclusion thing as well. So every venue has a no idling policy, but most bus drivers and truck drivers end up idling because the buses and the trucks are their homes, right? And what we have is we have such limited space that we're often not providing the trucks and the bus drivers a meaningful alternative to running the power of their vehicles. So a lot of fuel is being burned, where if we could think more creatively about providing, if we provide a crew room, if there is a kind of accommodation that would allow the truck and the bus drivers to not have to run their, gas. So that's an interesting point of tension that also gets into culture of belonging, culture of acceptance, because there is a hierarchy that we establish. That kind of is set by the tone of the culture of your tour manager, producer. I get the sense that everyone I'm meeting here creates a great relationship with their drivers, but I've seen that there's a not so great energy towards drivers sometimes. So when you focus on a culture of care and a culture of belonging, it'll also help you solve things like the inefficiency of constant idling vehicles and the gas consumption there. So go for it, Doug.
Just quickly on that point, I wonder if there's room for touring in the US to align more with touring in Europe in terms of generator usage and shore power, because it works in Europe. It's a little bit more complicated, but it works. And I've noticed now that for example, a certain big LA typical band bus hotel, the Sportsman's Lodge, has banned idling in its parking lot after many, many years of tour buses sitting with the Jenny on in their parking lot. And that sort of flipped things on their head in LA a little bit for the smaller tours that don't have day rooms, because a ton of those tours I've been in that parking lot with 8 buses all sitting idling their Jennies. So maybe a realignment needs to happen where shore power becomes more readily available, and the venues are going to need to come on board with that, and hotels are going to need to help out with that, because you need the bus to be running if you're sitting on it in 110 degrees in New Mexico or Arizona or wherever. So shore power, John,
shore power is a huge, especially if it's in a region where this is where we get into what I was talking about on the meta level, which is in California, if there was more shore power, that's going to be more renewable, because 17 to 27% of California's state grid is renewable. So if you're working in regions where they have more renewables, that shore power is going to be the cleanest power you can get. Now, if you're in a region where it's coal powered, that's another story, but that's going to be the reality. Shore power is actually always more efficient. Not 98% of the time more efficient.
I wonder if as I hear all these things, I'm wondering if there's a way to discuss this from an operational perspective in terms of environmental and or green operations versus just like environmental, like environmentalism, because I think that all these things are operationally driven, right? They're like how we travel, how we do logistics. They're all operational methodologies. I'm just wondering if they're, as we talk about health and safety and as we talk about these languages, I'm wondering if there's not a thought process around how we operate our tours, because production and tour management is really operations, right? Like we're really operating a large vehicle that's traveling. And I just wonder if you guys could really think about like the language of tour operations, and if there isn't a thought process around like efficient operations or efficient, more green logistics that says, if we do it this way, we're going to save money, but we have to put the time in the first phase to get there in order to make it more cost effective. And then who's going to be willing to go be innovational in that operational methodology? Because your point, right, Doug, is annoying to me, because it should have been solved a long time ago. We go to Europe and actually all around the world, like South Africa for me had the best security. Australia, I love their AV. England, I love some of the shore power operational stuff. In America, I love their loadings, right? Like everywhere I went, there was like one piece of the jigsaw puzzle that was just easier, So I just wonder if there's not like a logistical operational conversation here, is like, what is the application to allow us to rethink about efficiencies and innovation in that space?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, either Jen or Anthony, but we're saying this here and we're all nodding in agreement. John's in the comments. John, from the representing the transport, is saying the same thing. It needs more shore power. The venues, and that is applicable across a lot of these things. Recycling in a lot of US venues is non-existent. Waste management is non-existent. Shore power is non-existent. There needs to be some sort of pressure put upon the venues, and I don't have
It's a financial thing, which I think we need to recognize that it's an investment. Shore power for, as we know, in Europe versus shore power in America is a different animal. Where the investment into bringing a cable from outside, or bringing a major power run out to wherever it's going to be. So it's thing, and it's got to be an investment where I think everybody has to kind of pitch in to do it. It might be a thing where industry wide we have to go, this is what we want to do, and we need to pay for this also, because this is, a lot of venues are, I think venues are doing, but hotels, that's for the amount of entertainment that they do, I think it'd be a lot of money for them to do. You'd have to convince them why it's important to them to do it for the couple buses a month that they have on site, and so it's something that we need to, has it be a major conversation that we have with hotels and everybody, why this is important, and why it's not just an expense, but it's a moral issue in a sense, almost, and that's why they have to do it, because it's better for the environment, and we have to look into it, and maybe we maybe entertainment and people with buses have to pay a tax to do that, to do that to the hotels or whatever it is. There's a surplus, something like that. We got to think outside the box, because just saying that they have to do that, they're going to be like, you're looking at this amount of money for this amount of return. And that's where a lot of businesses are going to go to. So we have to get it from coming at it from another place.
Yes.
So before we
Yeah.
wrap, there was just a question that Alex Prince had, which kind of is a really nice bow on everything. Can you answer the question in Alex's the chat from the very beginning? Is there a known certification process for those who are trained in green friendly touring, or those who want to be, so that they can officially show on a tour that this is a skill set they have? That is a great question.
Yeah, it is. And that's what I was going to make my last comment about. So I think that there has been a desire for this for a long time, but it hasn't been the powers that be that need to be on the same page of endorsing something like that so it would actually be recognized and meaningful haven't had time to think about it, but this is the moment. So I am in conversations about something exactly like that I'm not able to announce or anything like that. But what I can tell you to do is, one, and this group and I and others that we want to invite in, because we know there are other, I am not the only person. I just happen to be a very available and active, passionate person, but there's many other people in this conversation. And so we've committed to keep working together as a group on resources and how we can provide. So keep following the tour management community and participating here. But there's a group called an easy place you can get your email that will get you information when this next thing is going to be launched, called the Sustainable Concerts Working Group. And so I will put it, I think I already have it on our resource page. I think on the tour management website, there's a live Google Doc resource page that I put together. But if you sign up for Sustainable Concerts Working Group, it puts your name on an email address list that we will be, that's the first group that's going to be invited to participate if there's a beta test. But basically at this moment, the answer is there is no certification for the touring industry. There are some event sustainability professional certifications that are based off an ISO standard that's really dominant in the EU, that is very popular for Olympics or FIFA or sports-based live events, and some select festivals. So there is a group called the Sustainable Event Alliance, run by a dear colleague of mine who I respect greatly. But my experience of what I've witnessed from that, it's very heavily geared towards equipping an individual to manage an organization or an event's application for this certification and understanding of the concepts of the certification. So that does translate, but it's not as well adapted as perhaps the stuff that you're about to hear about that we're working on now. Because what I can say is this, and I think it goes to what you just said, Doug and Jim, a lot of the sustainability resources that have been provided for the event industry have been provided for festivals or sports teams or more fixed events. There have been very few that have been thought about for the tour, specifically the crew production. So a venue might have recycling, but not in the production area, right? A venue might have public recycling, but not thought about how to provide recycling to a touring crew. And there's a lot of places where the crew and the roadie experience is the last one to be thought of. And that's what this group is particularly thinking of. So quick answer, no, there's some things that are credible, that are adjacent, but we are currently actively working on something for this community specifically. So if you could sign up to Sustainable Concerts Working Group, also whatever we create, I'm going to bring it to these guys first. So if they can endorse it, you'll hear about it from them too. And I'd say those are the two best ways to hear about it.
Very cool.
And thank you guys for your passion and creating this forum and letting me continue to play with you in the sandbox of innovation and moving the needle forward.
Thank you for continuing to come and join us. For sure.
Thanks everybody. Anthony stuck out in the ether world, but thanks Anthony.
Thanks Anthony. Thank you guys.
For anyone who's going to join us on Monday, it is alternative touring. We are going to take a dive into all different types of touring. So we look forward to seeing you on Monday, same time. And everyone have a great and safe weekend.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks,
Anthony.
Thanks, guys.